The Appalachian Mountains had always felt like home to Caleb. He'd been a park ranger for nearly a decade, patrolling the thick forests and craggy ridges with a sense of purpose. But there had always been a quiet unease about these mountains, an unspoken tension that lingered beneath their beauty. The locals often spoke of strange happenings, whispered warnings about staying on the trails. People had gone missing before, a hiker here, an elderly couple living in a remote cabin there. But recently, the disappearances had become more frequent, and the air of mystery surrounding them more unsettling. Caleb could feel the weight of each missing person pressing heavier on his shoulders, as if the mountains themselves were holding their secrets too tightly. It didn't help that strange voices had started echoing through the valleys at night. Caleb's wife, Emma, had passed away 6 months ago, a car accident on one of the winding mountain roads taking her life. The grief still clung to him like a wet blanket, heavy and suffocating. But work, the mountains, and the routines of patrolling the trails had offered some solace. Or at least they had, until now. "Caleb, you heading up the mountain today?" Sheriff Barnes's gruff voice pulled him from his thoughts. Caleb nodded, adjusting his pack. "Yeah, I'm going to check the eastern ridge again, see if there's any sign of that hiker." The sheriff shook his head. "I don't like it. Too many have gone missing up there. Be careful." "I will," Caleb said. Though he didn't feel particularly reassured, the eastern ridge had always been quiet, but nothing that should have caused so many people to disappear. He planned to stick to the main trails and double-check some of the known lookout points. He didn't want to believe the rumors about the strange voices in the forest, but they were becoming harder to dismiss. As he drove his truck along the old logging road and parked at the trailhead, the air felt cooler than usual, a mist clinging to the trees even though it wasn't yet noon. He took a deep breath, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs. This was his territory, and he knew it better than anyone. But the woods today felt different, quieter than usual, as though even the birds were holding their breath. He hiked for hours, checking old campsites and calling out for anyone who might be lost. But there was no sign of the missing hiker or the others. The trail twisted and higher into the mountains, the mist thickening, and Caleb found himself standing at a rocky outcrop with a sweeping view of the valley below. It should have been peaceful, but something gnawed at him, a tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. That's when he heard it. "Caleb." It was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. He froze, straining to hear. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Caleb, help me." His heart lurched. It couldn't be. He took a step forward, eyes scanning the trees. It was Emma's voice. "Emma," he called, his voice breaking. His pulse quickened, mind racing. He knew Emma was gone. He had held her hand in the hospital as the life faded from her body. Yet here was her voice, calling to him from the woods, sounding so real, so close. "Please, Caleb." The voice whimpered, this time tinged with pain, just as it had been the last time he'd heard her alive. Every rational part of his mind screamed that this was impossible, but the grief was stronger than reason. Without thinking, he veered off the trail, pushing through the underbrush in the direction of the voice. Branches whipped at his face and legs, but he barely noticed. The sound of Emma's pleas echoed in his ears, drawing him deeper into the forest, away from the trail, away from safety. He stumbled into a clearing and stopped. The voice was gone. Silence enveloped him, so thick it felt like a physical presence. Caleb's breath came in ragged gasps as he turned in a slow circle, his eyes darting from tree to tree. He was alone, but the forest felt like it was watching him. His radio crackled to life, breaking the stillness. "Caleb, you there? It's Sheriff Barnes. We need you to check in." He fumbled for the radio, but as his fingers closed around it, something in the forest shifted. The shadows seemed to lengthen, the trees bending in toward him like silent sentinels. And then, from behind him, he heard another voice. "Caleb?" He whirled around, heart pounding in his chest. It wasn't Emma's voice this time. It was the voice of one of the missing hikers, a young woman named Sarah who had vanished a few weeks earlier. Caleb had spoken to her once, giving her directions to a popular overlook. Now, her voice floated through the trees, pleading and broken. "Help me." A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't right. He took a step back, trying to calm the panic rising in his chest. Whatever was calling to him wasn't human. It couldn't be, but the voices, they sounded so real. "Sarah?" he called, knowing it was a mistake, but he couldn't stop himself. The voice didn't respond, but something moved in the trees ahead. A shape, dark and indistinct, slid between the trunks. Caleb felt a primal fear coil in his gut, the kind that came when you knew you weren't alone in the woods. He gripped the handle of his knife, taking another step back. The figure emerged from the trees, its shape human but wrong, too tall and too thin. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over bones that jutted out at sharp angles. But it was its face, or lack of one, that stopped Caleb in his tracks. Where its eyes and mouth should have been was only smooth, featureless skin, like something half-formed. Yet, despite its lack of a mouth, the voice of the young woman rang out again, this time clearer, more insistent. "Caleb, help me." The creature took a step forward, its movements unnervingly slow, like it had all the time in the world. Caleb's blood ran cold. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal he'd ever seen in these mountains. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. He stumbled back, heart racing, and grabbed the radio, his hands shaking. "Sheriff Barnes, I'm in trouble. I don't know what it is, but I need help. I need backup." There was a burst of static, and then Sheriff Barnes' voice crackled through. "Where are you, Caleb?" "I'm near the eastern ridge, off the trail," Caleb said, glancing around, trying to get his bearings. The creature was still advancing, its head tilted to one side, as if it were studying him. Then the sheriff's voice over the radio changed, just subtly enough for Caleb to notice. It became softer and more familiar. "Caleb, it's okay. You can trust me." The voice was no longer Barnes. It was Emma. His breath hitched in his throat, and for a split second, the grief washed over him again, threatening to drown him. But he fought it, forced himself to remember. Emma was gone, and this thing, whatever it was using her voice against him, playing with his mind, trying to lure him in. He backed away faster, stumbling over roots and rocks, as the creature glided forward, still whispering in Emma's voice, sweet and coaxing. "Caleb, don't run. You don't need to be afraid." But he was terrified. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the forest floor, not caring if he made noise. The creature didn't chase him at full speed. It didn't need to. It seemed content to follow, like it knew he couldn't escape forever. Caleb's lungs burned as he found the trail again. His truck wasn't far. He could make it. Behind him, the forest seemed to hum with voices now. Sarah's, Emma's, and others he didn't recognize, all calling out to him in unison, pleading, begging. His vision blurred with panic, but he pushed forward, ignoring the voices, refusing to look back. He burst from the trees and into the clearing where his truck was parked. Fumbling with his keys, he threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The voices grew louder, their pleas filling his ears even as he started the engine and peeled away, heart still pounding. Caleb didn't dare look back at the woods, but he knew, deep down, that whatever was out there in those mountains, it wasn't done with him yet, and it never would be.